Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to another Game Explained discussion. I'm your host, Steve Bowling, and I'm joined today by Nate the Hate. How's it going, Nate?
Not too bad. Great to be here again.
Thank you very much for coming on, and I'm also joined by our very own Tom Arnold, our thumbnail master. How's it going, Tom?
It's going well. I guess you could say Xbox is doomed now.
Ooh, yeah, that's right, because what we're talking about today is the big news that Microsoft acquired ZeniMax and by extension Bethesda, who creates Skyrim, Doom, Fallout, and a bunch of other huge IPs. This is massive news. I'm going to throw it to you first, Nate. What do you make of this news? What's your initial impression?
My initial impression is that, this is absolutely a massive deal for the industry, and it really positions Microsoft in a far stronger position than they were just, a week ago. And my first thought is this really increases the value of Game Pass exponentially when you're going to have games from Bethesda potentially released day one on Game Pass for no additional cost. And we know Sony's going to be charging, $70 for first-party games, and we see third-party publishers charging $70 for their new releases. The fact that I don't have to spend $70 on like the next Doom or next Wolfenstein and can just get it part of Game Pass is game-changing in my opinion.
Yeah, that is incredibly massive. Like the value that they're adding to Game Pass with this acquisition is pretty big. What do you think though, Tom? What's your initial take on this?
I thought, what a way to just quickly turn around the notion that maybe like Xbox doesn't have like a whole ton of games, even though like there is, but when you see it compared to the PlayStation lineup, you kind of think no games, even though there are. What a quick turnaround on that.
Yeah, that's another interesting angle on this. A lot of folks were saying that the PlayStation 5 has momentum going in because they've got Spider-Man and they've got Demon's Souls. Well, it's really hard to argue that taking all of Bethesda's properties and making them first party to the Series X is not going to be a huge boon to them in this generation. And to do it the day before Series X pre-orders open seems like really, really good timing. That is bound to move a few more consoles. So let's talk about potential downsides to this, because I'm curious what you guys think. Like, is there a downside to this? If obviously, if you're a PlayStation owner, there probably is. But do we think, first off, that Sony and Nintendo are going to lose out on Bethesda ports, or is Microsoft going to let them keep doing multi-platform games like they allow with Minecraft? What do you think, Nate?
It's an interesting question because I'd say in the immediate future we're not going to see much change, because if the contracts have already been signed and dealt, then they're going to stay committed to those contractual agreements. But moving into the future, there's a lot of uncertainty. Because let's use like Starfield or the next Elder Scrolls just as an example here. If I'm Microsoft, I know there's a base on the PlayStation. I know I can sell millions of units, and I know we can charge, that $70 premium price and potentially move, 10 million units. Am I going to give up that revenue stream strictly to make it exclusive on the Xbox or PC and potentially get, new users to invest in my ecosystem? And I mean, that's a lot of complex moving parts there. I mean, if I were in that, predicament, I would leave it multi-platform because I would want as many people to have access to the game and I would increase my profits. But if I want people to buy the Xbox, then in my interest it would definitely be keep it exclusive. So moving forward, it seems like it will probably be a case-by-case basis of the IP and where it would, best suit Microsoft or Bethesda's interest and, the audience on that platform. So like with the Switch, we're kind of at that point where we're transitioning into next gen for other platforms. The engines, the technical specs for these games are increasing, and the Switch is getting a little outdated. But if the release is a good fit for the Switch, I'm still publishing there. There are millions of people who want to play Bethesda games on the Switch. We've seen it with Skyrim and Doom. So I would definitely bring over, the next Doom if it's technically possible, the next Wolfenstein, again, if it's technically possible. But I might keep brand new IP exclusive to the Microsoft brand if I am Microsoft and Bethesda in this current situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good nuanced take on all of this. While we were talking, Jason Schreier actually put out a tweet with a statement from Phil Spencer. Sounds like Xbox plans to honor existing exclusives, exactly like you said, Nate. So Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo are still PS5 exclusive. And he said that future Xbox or future Bethesda games will be on Xbox and PC, guaranteed, of course. That makes sense. And other consoles on a case-by-case basis. So it looks like they're not entirely closing the door on the possibility of future PS5 or Nintendo Switch games. But it's nice to hear that, I think, because I think that there is a lot of people thinking that maybe they're just gonna shut those down and say, we bought the company, so everything's Xbox only from now on, which I don't think would really engender Microsoft to the larger gaming community because there are folks already reacting pretty negatively to this news, mostly folks that don't want to pick up an Xbox. What do you think, Tom? Do you think this is going to help or hurt Microsoft's reputation within the gaming community?
Well, that's a good one about if people will be mad at them, but would you care? I mean, people would change eventually. I would think kind of like the games, maybe some of these will be the equivalent of timed exclusives for existing IPs. Kind of like how Ori came out on Switch much later than the original launch, but not, too much later. But at the same time, you spend $7.5 billion for timed exclusives. So, of course, like we were saying, you'll keep some IPs. Probably their reputation as a company that has lots of great games will improve. Maybe in the short term they'll just take a small hit, but in the long run it's going to be good, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if we'll get anything. A lot of people are already speculating about a potential Doom and Halo crossover, which, I mean, same genre, but I can't even think of a way that would make sense in a narrative sense. But do you guys think that Microsoft is going to cross over any of Bethesda's IPs with their own? And if so, what do you think they're going to use? I'll throw that one first to you, Nate.
I mean, I can see them doing some sort of crossover type content, even if it's something as simple as like a Master Chief armor set in the next Doom. Just something to promote their first-party IP to a grander scale, kind of like we see Nintendo do their crossover where they threw Splatoon and Mario Kart. Has nothing to do with the Mario Kart, the Mario universe whatsoever, but it helped to promote Splatoon 2's upcoming release, or even like Smash Brothers. It's really, it's a celebration of all franchises and all the industry. So I could see Microsoft throwing some of those characters, be it like Marcus Phoenix in maybe Doom or Wolfenstein, or maybe even use the Elder Scrolls games to advertise Fable. Throw some of those items, kind of like what we saw with Skyrim on the Switch. We had the Zelda and the Breath of the Wild exclusive armor pack and the Master Sword. So why not do something from Fable if, Fable comes out after the next Elder Scrolls? Just some minor cross-promotion type things, but nothing that's heavy and in your face to the point of you ruined that franchise by making it all about that other Microsoft franchise. Subtle, nice little, hints and teases. But beyond that, I think what we're going to see from Bethesda is they're still going to operate on their own. The games are their vision, and Microsoft is going to meddle very, very minimally.
Yeah, I could agree with that. What do you think, Tom? Are we going to see anything heavy-handed, or has Nate pretty much nailed it?
Yeah, I think kind of bonus sort of little tiny packing content's good. You probably won't see the buddy Halo Doom guy FPS where Master Chief's like, hey, that's my helmet, and as they're like reaching to put him on or something like that. Don't. In the end, though, you will get Microsoft asking if they want to try taking on a franchise or vice versa. But I don't think you'll see that for the first year or two. They'll probably let them stay as is as long as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's important to note, and Nate alluded to this earlier in the discussion, is that there's a lot of already inked contracts that Bethesda has to honor, or that Microsoft has to find them a way out of. And I don't see Microsoft, spending $7.5 billion on a company and then spending untold, millions or even billions to get them out of development contracts they have with other platform holders. They've got Doom Eternal to deliver on Switch still. They've got Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo, and probably for each game we know about, there's 2 or 3 unannounced titles that they've been working on. And so I'm curious if we'll see, the next 2 years I think will be Bethesda just doing what they were already planning to do before the acquisition. So I don't think we'll really see the fruits of this, aside from Bethesda's entire back catalog appearing on Game Pass, which we'll talk about in a sec. I don't think we'll really see the fruits of this acquisition bearing anything new and original for at least a year or two. Because they have to wrap up their existing commitments, and then they can start working on brand new stuff. Every major publisher has probably at least a solid year or two of work laid out for them at any given time. But let's switch over, because we have kind of touched on Game Pass. And Microsoft alluded to it in their own press release, saying like, hey, we're adding Bethesda stuff to Game Pass, and now that they're first party, everything that comes out will be on Game Pass from day one. So when do we think we'll see Bethesda's back catalog of Xbox games start showing up on Game Pass?
I'd give it at least 6 months to a year.
You think we're going to wait that long?
We could see some trickle effects in the first 3 months of just some minor things. Like maybe you get some of those like original, like an Xbox game. You get Oblivion or something up there, or like Morrowind. You get some of those older games. But I could see any of the other efforts. It might take a little longer because, they probably would want to HD and add some 4K textures and actually make it, a big event other than just, here's some old games, enjoy them for what they are.
Sure. I kind of think that they're going to use this to sort of pad out the Series X launch lineup. Like, hey, if you pick up Series X, you can also play a load of Bethesda games on day one on your new console. But that being said, I do agree that some of those games, they'll probably want to improve them before they do that, especially since one of the selling points of Series X is that some of these older games will be in 4K with HDR and all this other stuff. So, and I'm sure that there's amount of work that has to go into that if they haven't been planning this for months beforehand, they would have to take some time. But I imagine we'll see at least a handful of Xbox One Bethesda games available from day one with Series X, but I could be wrong. What do you think, Tom? Are we is Bethesda on Game Pass happening sooner or later? What do you think it'll take time-wise?
Maybe you might see like a handful or a small amount of games with the launch, but I like Nate's thinking about, you want to make it a big event. If you just have an old game out on something, it's like, oh yeah, whatever. Like that's nice, but there's not much fanfare to it. So maybe just this is another kind of long-term solution for Xbox, and just the promise of games is sometimes more valuable than like knowing and having the games out already.
That's true. That is true. Sometimes just knowing that something really hype-inducing is coming can keep you aloft for a while. So I'm interested to see how this plays out. I'm interested to see how this acquisition affects the next-gen launch, and if Microsoft is going to try to get some of Bethesda's content up sooner rather than later. But I do agree that some of those other games could do to have some work done on them. They're not going to look great on a modern TV set, but do we think that the acquisition, because Bethesda is known for shipping buggy games at launch, do we think that Microsoft is going to try to get them to improve their processes on that front and maybe put their games through more rigorous QA? Or because having a game that's broken at launch is never a really good look, but people kind of just accept that from Bethesda and look the other way. Do we think that they're going to improve that process, and that Microsoft is going to kind of put their thumb down on them and say you need to launch with cleaner games or games that work better?
We can hope. We can definitely hope.
Yeah, I think that would be a positive that everyone could agree on if their games came out in a better state at launch. Because I think usually my strategy with most Bethesda games, save for Doom, is to wait like 3 or 4 months after it comes out for them to iron out all the problems.
Wasn't Todd Howard mentioning something about Microsoft? This acquisition will give them more resources, and it sounded a bit like he was alluding to that, while trying not to admit they release broken games sometimes.
Yeah, he gave them approximately 7.5 billion more resources, so hopefully that is actually being poured into some QA and more testing. But Yeah, it's interesting because I always find huge companies that are valued at such high prices saying they need more resources to be kind of funny. Like, I mean, did you not have enough before? Because I feel like you did, and you just chose not to. So I'm not sure that I necessarily buy the excuse that it was a funding or a resource problem before. I think it was just probably more of a time management issue, because I think if Bethesda could, I don't think Bethesda was incapable of fixing a lot of these issues before games launched, but in this business, there's, just a lot of external forces driving when you release a game. And I think a lot of game companies, not just Bethesda, are guilty of pushing a game out that's not really ready. And then, because they know they can patch them now, it's not like the old days where you shipped a physical game and that was it. They can deliver updates and continue to refine it and just kind of take their lumps. And I'm wondering if Microsoft will be less forgiving of that ideology, because Microsoft, for all people can say about them, their first party efforts generally ship in a pretty good state. Like, I can't think of the last time. Well, I guess Master Chief Collection is the last time I can think of a game shipping
Yeah,
really
I was thinking
broken.
of that. It's pretty good now, though.
Exactly. I mean, they definitely took a hit with Master Chief Collection's performance, but by and large, Microsoft's first-party efforts are fairly clean. Like, they don't have a lot of issues. I can't think, like, Flight Sim doesn't really have major. I mean, you need like a supercomputer to run it, but it doesn't have any game-breaking issues that I've heard of. So, do we think that, aside from the QA question, that Microsoft is going to kind of meaningfully change the way Bethesda operates?
I'll say that maybe they don't have to answer directly to investors now, or because they'll be under the Microsoft umbrella, and that might relieve some pressure.
That's a really good point. With Microsoft, kind of shielding them from that, I wonder if they'll be free to delay games to get them right more often. Because I can't imagine Microsoft would want the black eye of having a bunch of broken games on their consoles. And I do think that in the future, as Nate alluded to, that we're going to see fewer games coming out multi-platform. I think that we're going to see them, once they've finished development on the things they've committed to, and they start their first brand new project with Microsoft at the helm, I doubt that will be on PlayStation 5. More importantly, let's talk about the Switch specifically, because Bethesda has supported the Switch quite a bit. I personally think I think we're going to see continued support on the Switch, because Microsoft hasn't been shy about supporting the Switch themselves with games like Ori, which I think, Tom, you mentioned. I do think we're not going to see many, if any, day and date simultaneous releases on Switch, which, I mean, Bethesda themselves hasn't really been doing that. They promised it, I think, initially with Doom Eternal, and then they pushed it back, and it's still not here. So I am curious about when that's going to get delivered. But I think Microsoft kind of sees the Switch as something that supplements the Xbox owner's experience rather than competes directly against it. What do you guys think?
I would say with the Switch, it's maybe less of a direct competitor, as you say. So it's going to depend on how powerful the Xbox Series X is, and if those versions that might work that are kind of backwards compatible in a way can be ported to Switch, or how soon a Switch Pro comes out with maybe a more powerful version for that. But I wonder with PlayStation 5, right now with Xbox, maybe they're a bit, they're kind of behind, so they're releasing on other things. If Xbox is neck and neck with PlayStation 5 or in front, are they going to do the same thing, or are they just going to keep it on their own system? What do you think, Nate?
I think it's definitely going to be a game-by-game basis, and as you both have said, I think Microsoft views the Switch as kind of a complementary system. So if the Switch is a good fit for the game, let's just say they bring some of the older Bethesda games onto modern systems, I could see those games being ported over to the Switch, because they say, perfect time for that audience to be introduced to some of our IP. And then if we make a new entry to this IP exclusive to the Xbox and PC, those people might be interested. But those bigger games like the Starfields, they're using more advanced, tech engines. Those simply aren't going to be compatible with the current Switch. And, it's a lot of uncertainty what the Switch Pro could even introduce. But, the Switch successor, maybe we see Microsoft still play friendly with Nintendo. We've seen them do it in recent years. And if the relationship benefits Microsoft, and they continue to see the Switch as just that complementary device, they'll bring over some games, but there's a lot of uncertainty of how they're really going to approach this, because Bethesda games are usually technically ambitious, and Nintendo is the polar opposite. They don't make hardware that's really ambitious when it comes to technology and feature sets and asset use. So this could potentially be bad for Nintendo, but where there's a will, there's a way. And if Bethesda can bring their games over and Microsoft wants them on the Switch, we're definitely going to be seeing it. But the days of seeing the brand new Skyrim game or the brand new Elder Scroll games or the Starfields, that might be behind us. But I'd still say the ball is in Nintendo's court. Provide hardware that could functionality render these games and play these games, and we might still see it happen. So it's really kind of comes down to, what does Nintendo want from third-party support and moving into the future? And if it makes sense, Microsoft will be there with some Bethesda games.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Microsoft isn't going to want to dumb down Bethesda's releases to work on the current model of the Switch. I do think it really rests on whether Nintendo provides a hardware platform that's powerful enough to make porting worthwhile, without watering down the experience of the game too much. Because we are kind of, once Series X and PS5 release, the Switch is going to look rather long in the tooth from a horsepower perspective. I mean, it already was a few steps behind the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So with yet another generational leap, it'll just seem that further away. I'll be curious to see if Nintendo responds by introducing some kind of hardware that will allow for these ports to happen. And I do think Microsoft's not going to want to invest too much into porting. So I think the idea of that strategy of releasing older games on the Switch, to kind of coincide or dovetail with the releases of new entries, makes a lot of sense, because that, you can get a whole different set of fans into your IP, and then suddenly, hey, we've got the latest one coming out on our console, so go pick that up for $500 or whatever, $300 if you're talking about a Series S. So, but I still can't shake the feeling I view Microsoft strictly, almost entirely, as the Game Pass company now. And this to me almost feels like a Netflix kind of move, where they just acquire a stable of IP that they know people love, that they can develop further to sell their service, not necessarily a specific piece of hardware. And just the way they kind of highlight Game Pass multiple times in the press release kind of speaks to me that I'm probably not too far off on my thinking of what Microsoft's focusing on here. They really want to impress upon people that Game Pass is a thing, and all these games will be there. All you have to do is subscribe. And I've seen a lot of folks, especially folks in Europe, because Nate, we were talking about this in our last discussion, where games are £80 or whatever the price is, and they've just gone up to this massive level. And these folks can subscribe to Game Pass and get these games for nothing on top of their subscription they've already got. That's a huge value. Microsoft continues to add just incredible amounts of value to Game Pass, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is their last generation of physical hardware that they're doing, and they just try to push people to subscribing to this service. Do you guys think that these acquisitions are more for Game Pass or more for exclusives on Series X?
Game Pass, absolutely. I mean, if we look at just the most recent acquisitions that Microsoft has made, they're Western-based. You have EA Access, part of Game Pass, for no additional charge. Now you're going to add Bethesda games to Game Pass. And those are being added to Microsoft's stable of first-party IP. And all these will be available like day one. So you're having sports games, Western RPGs, shooters. All of a sudden, Game Pass is a service that's covering almost every need of the Western gamer. The only weak spot Game Pass has right now is Japanese support, but we've seen Square Enix bring Dragon Quest, the Final Fantasy franchise, we have Yakuza from Sega. It's building up to kind of appeal to the worldwide taste for any gamer, and it's still such an incredible value. And if Microsoft continues to make acquisitions, like let's assume they go to Japan and they buy Sega or Atlas, and now you're having like the Persona games on Game Pass day one. It doesn't matter if you own the Xbox, because you can get Game Pass on PC. Microsoft is really pushing the idea of, we don't care if you invest in our hardware. We just want you part of the Game Pass ecosystem. You can enjoy all these games. We don't care where you play them. If we bring it to your TV, your phone, even if we brought it to the Switch or PlayStation 5, as long as you're giving us that monthly subscription fee, we're fine with it.
Yeah, I think that sums up how I feel about it pretty nicely too. What do you think, Tom? Are we looking at a company trying to sell a service or sell hardware?
They're selling a service, but certainly these recent acquisitions, it certainly won't hurt the hardware sales too. I mean, it benefits both, but as a more of a long-term play, it's definitely for Game Pass. I would see Microsoft being more flexible with the console designs, as we've seen where you have the Series S and the Series X, and just having that option available, but not having it the focus. It's there, but you can play on your PC, you can play on your phone, and just not caring as much and staying true to that. It's all about the game.
Yeah. So Nate, you mentioned something interesting about Sega, or about Microsoft potentially purchasing a Japanese developer. Is Sega your primary pick for that, or do you think that they would target some other group?
Sega would be my primary pick because they do have that strong stable of IP, but the company seems to be cheaper than other prestigious Japanese studios. I mean, Capcom has found tons of success with the Monster Hunter franchise and Devil May Cry and Resident Evil in recent years, or they found, they rediscovered their roots, per se. And Sega still seems to struggle. They've put out their fiscal reports and they always seem to be losing money, and then they say, oh, we should bring our games to other platforms. And that just seems like a company ripe for the picking. If I'm Microsoft, I can get them for cheap. But I know a lot of people keep saying, oh, well, Microsoft or Sony should buy From Software. But they're part of a media conglomerate, and, that will never happen. So the only other company I could see that's probably within reason would be something like a Koei Tecmo. A solid studio, but not, gigantic. They could probably get them for, a relatively cheap price, more like a AA studio price compared to a AAA. But worldwide appeal, Sonic, everyone knows Sonic. And I think that would serve Microsoft's interest the best, to have that character that everyone recognizes. And then you have access to those other IP like the Persona, the Valkyrie Chronicles, and you just flesh out that library and have such a diverse offering of other IP that Sega and Atlus hold. And that would really strengthen Game Pass from that Japanese perspective.
Yeah, I think that Koei Tecmo is an interesting pick. I would be surprised if Nintendo didn't do their best to outbid Microsoft on that one, given how cozy they've been.
Yeah.
With Hyrule Warriors 2 coming, and they've Nintendo has really cozied up to Koei Tecmo in the last few years. So I think that they would try to counter any offer Microsoft put on the table. But with Sega, I could definitely see happening. Sega and Microsoft have historically been kind of cozy with one another. Sega supported the launch of the original Xbox with Jet Set Radio Future and with Shenmue 2, among other things. PSO, and recently they partnered in the West to bring PSO 2 over here. Like, Microsoft and Sega are cozy right now. Even the Western release of PSO 2 is run on Microsoft's Azure, so that's like a huge, they basically helped Sega rebuild the game for the Western market, which is a lot considering that Microsoft doesn't seem to be involved beyond the back-end infrastructure of the game. And it could very well be that that's maybe just the beginning of an overture towards Sega to try to eventually acquire them, which I think would be a good fit. I think that Sega's IP kind of fits well with Microsoft's existing brand image, if you will. I think that it would give them kind of Nintendo quality that they're lacking right now, that ability to have rich, compelling characters and IPs and history that Microsoft just doesn't seem to have. Sony's been building that up steadily over time, and I think that Sony does kind of have a list of beloved franchises, first-party offerings, and I think Microsoft still kind of struggles there. We see those banners where they introduce all their characters, and they still have the Forza car in the background. We've got Master Chief, but also this Ford Mustang over here. So I think it would help them. If you had Sonic, that's an easy, obviously a banner character to have in your stable. That could be Microsoft's answer to Mario. They could help revitalize that. Not to mention just a ton of the IP that Sega has ignored for decades. Shinobi, Alex Kidd. You've got a lot of options to create new, interesting games. So I could definitely see that happening. But I'm curious, Tom, we haven't heard from you yet. Do you think that there are any other Japanese developers, or do you think that Sega is the most likely target for an acquisition from Microsoft?
From what I can think, Sega's most likely target. It would help with the family angle for Sonic. I mean, then, Xbox be more appealing for parents with kids, perhaps. There could be like smaller developers in there, like maybe the single game studio companies, or maybe just work on some deals at first and see how it goes. Like, let's say an ultimate sort of blow to Sony would be to like take Kojima away from them. But I get the feeling Sony's pumped many millions of dollars into his studio, and that, considering the last one didn't fare the best, I don't know if they'd be going for something like that. Or even if Sony at this point would consider it as valuable unless his next game's a huge step above. Koei Tecmo, they did have that good relationship before for Ninja Gaiden, but at this point I would say Nintendo is helping them out so much. The opportunities there that I couldn't see them really hopping over to Xbox unless they get a chance to make games they really want to make and get to work with their own IP. But, I'd say working with Nintendo IP is a great opportunity that probably most studios wouldn't want to pass up.
Yeah, see, that's the thing for me. I think with Koei, I feel like Nintendo has given them enough trust and brought them in close enough that they would likely pass up the opportunity to get that Microsoft money just to continue to work with Nintendo, especially since Nintendo is absolutely dominating in Japan right now with the Switch. So
yeah.
It seems to me like that would be Microsoft would have a hard time with that. And I think that Sega, like Nate said, is kind of that perfect studio with a long legacy that still hasn't burned up its goodwill and has a foothold in Japan, which Microsoft historically has had major problems with. And I don't think that any of the moves they've made so far have really done anything to rectify that. I don't think that Japanese fans are going to go out in droves to pick up a new Xbox this year.
Mm-hmm. Hold on. What does this mean for Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, though, if this happens?
Oh man, if that happens, then I'll be honest. I think Microsoft would be the best company to let Sega continue to foster a relationship with Nintendo.
That's true.
Any other, like if Sony picked up Sega, then I think we would see the end of that entirely. Anyway, I think we've kind of covered. I mean, we're droning on about about Sega now, so I think we've covered what we think about Bethesda and the Microsoft acquisition. Does anybody have any closing thoughts on what this means or anything we didn't cover?
I mean, it's a big move for the industry. I'm very curious to see where this leads in the coming years. Like we talked about earlier, in the immediate future, we're probably not going to see the big impacts of this deal for at least another 2 to 3 years. But the takeaway right now is that Microsoft is strengthening Game Pass. They are committed to making Game Pass a compelling service. And if we see Game Pass expand to platforms beyond, Xbox and PC and cell phones, and we see it come to just, TV services or the Switch or the next Nintendo platform or even a PlayStation platform, and we see Microsoft embrace Game Pass really as a service for everyone at any time on any device, this type of deal is going to be the reason that people invest in that. And as far as future support goes for, Nintendo or Sony, it's curious to see where things go. We're going to have to wait to see the impacts of this deal and if we are going to see less software appear on these devices. But, this is a big move for the industry. It's showing the direction the industry is moving. It's no longer, you can't just come in and make a deal for an exclusive game. If you want to make your platform something beyond just a box, you have to go out and make these acquisitions, and Microsoft is doing that. Microsoft is changing the industry for better or worse. We'll find out. But it's exciting times, though there's a lot of uncertainty as to what this means in the long run.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. How about you, Tom? Any final thoughts?
I'm going to say, we're still going to have Doom on PC, so you won't get people mad there. Obviously, services are the current way of the future. And thinking about it, we don't have that many AAA publishers/developers left now. It is getting to be like maybe less than a handful at this point. That is a playing space that I guess we'll see more of the quadruple A type game coming up, possibly.
Yeah, I think that both of you are making very valid points. I mean, Microsoft is definitely doing this is huge. This will change things for the foreseeable future, where what happens in the next 2 to 3 years is going to be deeply interesting. Microsoft has been making lots of key acquisitions to strengthen their first-party lineup, and I think that makes sense. I don't think there's any arguing that this is a good move for Microsoft. Whether it's a good move for players remains to be seen. We'll find out how exactly Microsoft handles Bethesda once we're midway through this current generation. And Tom's point about there being just a handful of AAA studios left is true, because people are buying them up. Platform holders are trying to lock these studios down into making games for them, which again, from a business perspective, makes all the sense in the world. Why wouldn't you want the best games only on your platform? Because that's what will drive people to buy your expensive plastic box. So I think that there's a lot of interesting angles. I think this generation is going to be very telling on what ideology wins, because this is less a battle of just of who has the best hardware, but more a battle of who's got the right idea of how gamers want to play, with PlayStation sticking to the traditional generational console strategy, Microsoft moving to games as a service, and Nintendo doing what Nintendo does. So I guess we'll wait and see, but I think that wraps up our discussion for today. Thanks again, Tom and Nate, for joining me. Nate, where can we find you?
You can find me on YouTube at Nate the Hate, or you can find me on Twitter at Nate the Hate, followed by the number 2. I have a podcast discussion up on that channel right now about the Nintendo emulator that was used in 3D All-Stars and whether or not that means Nintendo could bring more N64 or Wii games to the eShop as HD releases. We also touch on the Switch revision for 2021 and when it could be announced and when we would see it and what type of software could launch with it. I'll also have a podcast talking about Bethesda and its impacts on the industry up later this week.
That is awesome. And you can find Tom in the thumbnail for this video, probably, as well as on Game Explained. Thanks again, both of you, for joining us today. And that about wraps up our discussion. As always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to Game Explained for much more on the next generation of consoles and all other things gaming as well. Ring that notification bell to be the first to know every time a new video goes up. And I'll see you next time.